Hello, guys, dolls, and everything in between, and welcome to Plastic Chat. Just Rachel here today to show off my first customizing video. If you watched my video with Joe, you'll know that we just revealed to each other our spooky Halloween dolls. We each wanted to show the process of making said doll, so this is mine. I started with a concept drawing. I wanted to go for a spooky mermaid, since the legs on my doll were almost completely unusable. I started my process by removing the head and cutting off all the hair, while also removing all the hair. Once the hair is removed, I have to cut through the vinyl head to get to the eyes underneath. Once the eyes are out, it's time for a quick acetone bath to clear off all the factory paint and prepare them for painting. One quick spray of Tester's Dull Coat later, and she's ready to be painted. I'm using an Army Paint primer to paint these heads. It's a nice saturation and nice coverage for minifigures and dolls. One more spray later, and the head is ready to be customized. But first, she needs eyes. I picked up this nice pack at Michael's for about $5, and I just wanted to see if they would work. They seem a little bit bigger than the original eyes, but I think we can kind of make it work. Looking inside, they fit nicely, but I didn't like the way they looked. So instead, I decided to make my own using polymer clay and some tools. After I measured out the clay, I began pushing a little divot with my tools. This will create a nice base to paint and also a nice divot to make the resin bubble up and look like the iris. Not bad. In the oven they go. I made a couple dozen just in case. Now it's time to pick a pair and make her eyes. I want a pair that matches pretty much size-wise. And after finding two, the rest go off to the side for another project. I'm using an Army Paint War Paints Kraken skin for the color. The saturation is nice, and the colors stay very well. They're made for minifigures. After I paint what's going to be the iris, I let it dry. I wasn't a big fan of the solid green, so I wanted to do a more blue-green like the drawing had. Once they're painted, it's time for the resin. I'm using a clear UV resin that I picked up at Michael's. I drop one dollop in each divot. That looks so cool! And then stick them under the lamp to hopefully cure. After they cured, they looked kind of cool with all the bubbles. Now it's time for her face. I don't really like drawing on dolls' faces with my watercolor pencils. It tends to scratch and kind of mess up what I'm trying to do. I'll do vague outlines like these with her eyebrows, but I won't do the whole face like this. I tend to use a combination of pastels and watercolor pencils. Sometimes I'll use acrylic depending on what the doll is. With her face up, I wanted her to look kind of gaunt without having to do a bunch of sculpting, so I think I kind of achieved that with the dark cheeks. It also looks like a skeleton. So I might use this for a face-up in the future if I ever wanted to do more of a skeleton. I usually dump as much pigment as I can where I need to, especially for this where I want her to look super dark. And then I'll take back what I need to with a rubber eraser. It was looking a little too dark the more that I worked with it, and trying to make those clean lines really solidified to me that this was more of a skeleton job than it was a mermaid. The lines just seemed a little too strong. I do like the tiredness that the pastels give her eyes though. I wanted to make her look like she drowned, and I don't know where I heard it from, but I heard this story that your lips turn green when people drown. So I thought I'd try a little bit of that with the pastels. After a spray of Tester's Dull Coat, I'm ready to use my watercolor pencils. I'm not a big fan of drawing on faces. I enjoy lifting the pigment on the watercolor pencils and painting it on. Eyebrows are always tricky. I wanted to make her look like she was frowning, so I had to extend the lip line a little bit. With the watercolor pencil, I can do cool effects like adding her running mascara. With my tiniest brush, I add eyelashes and details to the eyebrows. This lip line did not want to extend at all, and it kept getting muddled down. I think I got it eventually though. She's ready for eyebrow detail and some final touches. I'm spraying Tester's Dull Coat in between each medium change. That way when I use the watered down acrylics, it doesn't affect the watercolor pencil underneath. So with some last eyebrow and eyelash touches, she's done. Let's see what she looks like with her eyes inserted. Oh, she looks so cute! I mean sad, but cute! Seal the eyes in with sticky wax, glue the top on, and we're ready to work on her body. I started with a quick prep, sanding, cleaning, taking off the legs, and preparing it for a nice paint job. If you remember from the video, I was working on a small doll as well, and I realized that when I was sanding, the plastic is so cheap, it was coming off. Well, at least she's supposed to look like a monster. At first I wanted to try pasteling the body, but it was increasingly obvious that the gray would just not be what I needed, and with this cheap plastic it would take forever. So I moved to paint. I'm using Warpaint's Brush On Primer. I was originally going to use it for a base, but I enjoyed the color so much I decided to use it throughout the entire body. Priming the body really helps the paint stick, and especially on the joints. If I sand it down enough, they won't chip as much. There she goes to dry. We can work on the rest of the body. I wanted her to have a big mermaid tail, but I needed to draw out a pattern for it. So I laid her out and measured, with my eyes, about how proportionate a tail would be to a body of this size. I sketch out the tail on this long piece of paper that I'm going to use as a pattern to cut the fabric and the foam later. After some fine detailing, it's time to make the tail wire. This tail is going to be a combination of aluminum and floral wire wrapped with thread so that it adheres to the foam and will make it easier to glue the entire piece together. I measure out the wires to the length that I need. And then cut it. Wrapping the wires like this will help adhere them to the foam. And there we go. Now we're ready to make the rest of the tail. Now that the wires are done, it's time to cut the foam. But first, we need to attach the wire to the body. I do that by threading it through the holes that her legs left, and then making it fuse to the body with plumber's epoxy. Please remember to always wear gloves when using plumber's epoxy. It's just generally not good for your skin. While that dries, we can cut the tail out of foam and then cut it in half. My foam was pretty thick, so I didn't have to cut two solid pieces. Instead, I just cut one big piece out of the pattern I made and then split it in half. Yay! I'm going to use Fabri-Tac to stick the wire and the body to the foam. I usually have a very specific foam glue that I use at work, but Fabri-Tac works in a pinch. I coat one side and then press the body into it. I coat the other side and then press them together like a sandwich. Make sure to screw the cap back on. Once that's dry, it's ready for a trim and some fabric. I got this fabric at Joann's, and it looks kind of like scales. I have to sew everything by hand, so making a pattern as simple as it can be is the easiest thing for me. This tail should be relatively simple. The fabric is a bit iffy, but it's not something that I haven't worked with before. I measure with my eyes and make sure it'll fit. And then it's done. Time for a tail fitting. This fabric was not stretchable at all, and I was so worried the seams were going to rip, especially toward this end part. But after a lot of struggle and a long time, and a lot of glitter on my hands, I finally got it. And there we go, a perfect little mermaid tail. Before I do anything else, I want to cut out her heart. It should be simple with this kind of plastic. It's hollow on the inside. So let's take a Dremel and see what happens. It was fairly simple. It was hard to control the Dremel on it though because it was so hollow. Now she's ready for her dress. I made this pattern myself as well, and even though I had a bunch of struggles with it, it's something I would 100% try again. I realized a little late in the project that even with these knockoff dolls, you can remove the hands. The very last step is the mermaid tail, which I stuff with polyfill after sewing together and attach to the doll. The final step is the blood of her heart. I'm using an acrylic ink, which is liquidy but surprisingly controllable and will stain the fabric. And with that, she's ready for hair. This is my first time using yarn as hair, and so I got all the necessary materials and started at it. To make yarn wefts, you cut your yarn double the length that you want it to be, because pulling it apart will take out some of the fibers. Some people like super fluffy. I kind of wanted more of a dreadlock feel with mine, so it's a little bit fluffy in some places and more yarn-like in other places. Now we're ready to apply it to the doll. For the yarn wefts, I just started cutting them off and gluing them on with Fabri-Tac. I used a toothpick to apply the Fabri-Tac, and once it was ready, I would cut off different sections of the dowel I made and press them on. The Fabri-Tac is a very quick drying clear glue, and it's made for projects like this. It has a really nice hold without being too messy or taking too long to dry. After gluing down all the wefts, her hair's done. Not so fast. I'm putting in moss. I want her to look mid-transformation. Not as covered in moss as the little doll I'm making, but still little hints of what she's going to become. 'Tis the season for spooky. I use Fabri-Tac to glue those down as well, making sure I like where they're placed before I glue them down. This stuff is surprisingly hard to work with. I wonder if it would have been easier with a plug-and-play system. Ah well, next project. The doll herself is done, but the last thing we have to make is her heart. To make the heart itself, I'm using a couple different UV resins and mixing them together to create the color I want. I'm using a combination of orange clear and a black opaque dye that I have. I'm not going to be using a lot of opaque dye, but there's a color in it, like a hot pink when it's cured, and I like that color as a base. Once I'm happy, I start pouring it into the mold. I'm using two sides of a heart and smashing them together like a sandwich. So this mold has two of the same heart right next to each other. Then I pour the rest because I don't want to waste it. Then in the lamp it goes. Once it's cured, it's time to put the whole thing together. This project is going to take a lot of sanding, so we're bringing out the big guns. So what I want to do with this process is I want to sandwich the two resin pieces together, which means I'm going to have to sand a lot and keep checking to make sure I don't take too much resin away. I want them to be as flat as possible, which is a little bit difficult when I don't have a flat surface to keep sanding it on. Also, dipping your sandpaper in water, especially with resin, before sanding, helps stop dust from accumulating and stops scratches on your resin. Once they're flat enough, it's time to connect the two pieces together. I use a small dot of clear resin and spread it on one side with a toothpick. Any resin can act like a glue, depending on what you put it on and what you're trying to stick it to. When you're trying to stick it to itself, it's perfect. This clear resin will ensure that there's no opaqueness to the heart while still being very sturdy and hard. Make sure they're lined up, and then it's once again in the lamp. While that's curing, how about we work on the base? I'm going to connect the heart to the base with a wire. So I cut the wire to the length that I wanted, and then use my Dremel to make a small divot in the base. This divot will help give the UV resin something to hold the wire to. Hold it straight. Under the lamp it goes. After curing and being sanded, it just takes a quick polish. We have our heart. And now the doll is officially done. Overall, I had a really good time with this custom. It was my first mermaid, and though it was a bit of a challenge, it was kind of nice to explore something new for a change. I think she came out as just the perfect combination of sweet and spooky. The eyes were also new for me, but it was definitely a technique I will 100% do again. My favorite piece overall, though, has to be her heart. To me, that came out the best out of everything. Thank you so much for watching my process on my spooky mermaid doll. Make sure to follow me and Joe on all of our socials to see future dolls and future custom videos. Stay plastic!